Emily had always loved the walk home from school. It gave her time to daydream, to think about what she'd learned that day, and sometimes to simply enjoy the quiet. Her mother, always a few steps behind, would call out reminders to be careful crossing the streets, but Emily had long since gotten used to the rhythm of their routine. She knew the way by heart. It was a chilly afternoon when Emily noticed something unusual. The usual bustling noise of the park was quiet, the usual hustle of kids playing and parents chatting replaced by an eerie silence. As she passed the park bench by the old oak tree, something caught her eye. A small, scruffy dog huddled near the edge of the path. The dog's fur was matted, dirty, and its ribs seemed to stick out from its sides. It had clearly seen better days. At first, Emily wasn't sure what to do. She glanced around, half expecting someone to appear and call the dog, but there was no one in sight. The dog's sad, brown eyes locked onto hers, and it whined softly. Emily's heart squeezed at the sight. She took a step forward, unsure of the dog's situation. Was it lost? Was it hungry? Her fingers closed around the last half of her sandwich in her lunchbox. She hadn't finished it at lunch, but it seemed like a small enough gesture to offer. Without a second thought, Emily pulled the sandwich out, tearing it in half. She knelt down slowly, offering the food toward the dog. "Here," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. The dog, hesitant at first, sniffed the air before cautiously stepping closer. Its tail wagged just once, weakly. Emily felt a rush of warmth flood her chest as the dog took the food from her hand, eating it carefully, as though savoring every bite. As she watched the dog eat, Emily felt a sense of responsibility settle over her. She had always been taught to be kind, to look out for those in need, and in that moment, she felt like this little creature in front of her was just as deserving of care as anyone else. She smiled down at the dog, her fingers gently scratching behind its ears, and the dog's tail gave a small wag, the first real sign of life she'd seen from it. When it finished eating, the dog didn't run away. It simply sat there, watching her with those wide, pleading eyes, as if silently asking for more. Emily wasn't sure what to do next. She didn't have more food to give, but something inside her told her to stay. She sat down on the bench beside the dog, just enjoying its quiet company. After a few minutes, Emily stood up, her heart still warm. "I have to go now," she whispered to the dog, unsure why she felt so attached to this stray creature after only a few moments. But just as she turned to leave, the dog stood up too, following her a few steps. Emily stopped, looking back at it. It looked at her, its eyes still filled with that same quiet desperation. But there was something else in its gaze now. A spark. A connection. "Don't worry," she said softly, with a reassuring smile. "I'll be back tomorrow." And with that, she walked away, glancing over her shoulder one last time. The dog was still there, watching her go, as if it knew their story had just begun. The next day, Emily couldn't shake the thought of the dog. As she walked home from school, she found herself glancing at the familiar park bench, hoping to see the little stray again. The chilly autumn breeze made the trees rustle, and the leaves danced around her feet. But when Emily reached the spot where she had left the food yesterday, there was no sign of the dog. Her heart sank. Maybe it had wandered off somewhere else, or maybe it wasn't even in the park anymore. She stood still for a moment, watching the empty space, wondering if she would ever see the dog again. Her mother, walking a few steps behind, called out, "Come on, sweetheart. We're almost home." But Emily wasn't ready to leave just yet. She turned to her mother. "Can I leave a little food for him, just in case he's around here somewhere?" Her mom smiled warmly, nodding. "Of course, but we should get home soon. It's getting cold." Taking the last piece of her sandwich from her lunchbox, Emily carefully placed it on the park bench. She watched it for a moment, a quiet hope blooming in her chest. "I'll leave it here. Maybe he'll come back," she whispered to herself. With one last glance at the bench, she reluctantly started walking toward home, her footsteps a little slower than usual. But just as she reached the end of the park, she heard it, a faint rustling sound behind her. She stopped in her tracks, her heart racing. Was it him? She turned around, her eyes scanning the area. And there, standing in the distance under the shade of a tree, was the dog. This time, it wasn't standing still. The dog had moved closer, its tail wagging slowly as it watched her from afar. It didn't come charging toward her like before, but Emily could see the recognition in its eyes. This time, it wasn't afraid. It knew her. A warm smile spread across Emily's face, and she took a few cautious steps forward, not wanting to startle the dog. "Hi there," she called out softly, keeping her voice gentle. The dog's ears perked up at the sound of her voice, and it began to move closer, its movements hesitant but purposeful. It sniffed the air as if confirming it was indeed her. And then, with a soft whine, it walked slowly toward Emily. She knelt down to meet it halfway. The dog stopped a few feet away, tilting its head slightly as if trying to figure her out. Emily's heart swelled with affection. "I'm glad you came back," she said quietly, her hand outstretched. The dog hesitated, then approached her, sniffing her hand. When it finally allowed her to pet its head, she felt a sense of relief. It was as though the small bond they shared was growing stronger with each passing moment. "Would you like to come home with me?" she asked, though she knew it was a big question. The dog looked up at her with those deep, soulful eyes, and for a long moment, neither of them moved. It was as if the dog was weighing her words, trying to decide what to do next. Then, without warning, the dog gave a soft, low bark and nuzzled her hand, as if accepting her offer. Emily's eyes widened with joy. "I'll take that as a yes," she exclaimed, her heart soaring. With the dog now following closely behind, she slowly made her way back toward the sidewalk, glancing at the park one last time. The stray wasn't just a fleeting encounter anymore. This little dog, this new friend, had chosen her. And without knowing it, Emily had just started a new chapter in her life. The next morning, Emily couldn't wait to see Lucky again. She had named him the night before, after he followed her home. It felt like the perfect name for the dog that had shown up in her life just when she needed a little extra happiness. The thought of him curled up on her doorstep, waiting for her, made her feel excited as she ate her breakfast. As she finished her cereal, Emily's mom called from the kitchen. "Emily, come here for a second." Curious, Emily stood up and walked over. Her mom was standing near the front door, looking out the window with a perplexed expression. "What is it, Mom?" Emily asked, her curiosity piqued. Her mother turned, a bit surprised. "There's something outside. You should take a look." Confused, Emily went to the door and peered out the small glass panel. Her breath caught in her throat. There, sitting patiently on the front porch, was Lucky. His scruffy fur was damp from the morning dew, and his brown eyes gleamed with an unmistakable sense of purpose. He was waiting for her. Emily's heart leaped with joy. She opened the door slowly, stepping out onto the porch. "Lucky," she called softly, bending down to meet him. The dog's tail began to wag furiously. Without hesitation, he stood up and trotted over to her, nuzzling her hand with affection. Emily laughed, crouching down to give him a good scratch behind the ears. "What are you doing here, huh?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. He had come to find her, just like she had hoped. Her mom, still standing in the doorway, watched the interaction with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "Well, it seems like he's taken a liking to you, Emily," she said, a soft smile tugging at her lips. Emily nodded eagerly, her eyes wide with excitement. "He's my friend, Mom. He's not just any dog. He's special." She paused for a moment, thinking about it. "I think he's been looking for me." Her mom raised an eyebrow. "He definitely found you, that's for sure." The dog looked up at Emily with those trusting eyes, then walked up the steps and sat down on the porch as if it was his new favorite spot. He seemed completely at ease, as if he had decided that this was where he belonged. Emily's heart warmed as she watched him. This wasn't just a random stray anymore. This was her friend, someone she could count on, no matter what. "I think he wants to stay," Emily said, looking at her mom with hopeful eyes. Her mom thought for a moment before speaking. "I'm not sure we can just let him stay, sweetie. What if he has an owner? Maybe someone is looking for him." Emily's face fell a little at the thought, but then she looked down at Lucky, who was now lying contentedly at her feet, eyes closed in a peaceful sleep. "But what if he doesn't have an owner anymore?" she asked softly. "What if he's been out here all alone?" Her mom hesitated, seeing the concern in her daughter's eyes. Emily had a way of making her heart melt, and it was hard to say no when her daughter showed so much empathy. Finally, her mom sighed and gave a reluctant nod. All right, he can stay for a little while, but we'll have to figure out what to do next. Emily's face lit up with joy, and she bent down to give Lucky another gentle pat on the head. Thank you, Mom, she exclaimed, her voice full of excitement. I promise I'll take care of him. As the day went on, Emily and Lucky spent more time together. He followed her around the yard, his tail wagging at the smallest bit of attention. It was clear that he felt safe with her, and Emily couldn't help but feel the same. There was something about Lucky that made her feel like everything was going to be okay. As the sun began to set, Emily sat on the porch, her hand resting on Lucky's back. She knew, deep down, that this was the start of something special. No matter what happened next, she was determined to make sure that Lucky would never feel alone again. As the days went by, Emily and Lucky became inseparable. Each afternoon after school, Emily would race home to find him waiting for her on the porch, tail wagging in anticipation. He would follow her everywhere, into the yard, through the house, and even up to her room, where he'd curl up in his favorite spot by the window. Emily felt a deep sense of companionship, as if they had known each other forever. Lucky had brought a new kind of joy into her life, one that she hadn't realized she was missing. But one afternoon, as Emily was brushing Lucky's fur, something unusual caught her eye. There, just beneath his coat of scruffy brown fur, she noticed a faint circular mark around his neck. It was almost invisible at first, blending with the dirt and knots in his fur. But as Emily parted the hair around it, she could see it more clearly. It was a subtle, light patch of skin, as though a collar had been worn there for a long time. Curiosity bubbled up inside her. What did this mark mean? Had Lucky been wearing a collar at some point? If so, where had it gone? She reached out to touch the mark, her fingers gently tracing the smooth skin. The thought nagged at her. This dog had a past. He couldn't have just appeared out of nowhere. He had belonged to someone. Mom, Emily called, her voice filled with concern. Her mother walked into the room, wiping her hands on a dish towel. What's up, sweetie? Look at this, Emily said, pointing to the spot on Lucky's neck. Do you think it means he had a collar before? Her mom bent down to inspect the mark, her eyes narrowing in thought. It does look like he used to wear something there, but it's hard to say for sure. We may never know the full story unless we can find his owner. Emily's heart sank a little at her mom's words. The idea that Lucky had once had a home, and that someone may have lost him, made her feel protective. She didn't want him to be abandoned again. He had found her, and she couldn't bear the thought of him returning to a life on the streets. I wish we could find out more about him, Emily said quietly, her gaze fixed on Lucky, who was now lying on the rug, looking up at them with his soulful eyes. I feel like he's been through a lot. Her mom nodded thoughtfully. It's possible he's been lost or abandoned, but we can't just assume. Maybe we should ask around the neighborhood, see if anyone recognizes him. Feeling a mix of determination and concern, Emily decided to take action. The next day, after school, she made a plan. She would walk through the neighborhood, asking anyone who might know anything about the dog. She knew it was a long shot, but if there was even the smallest chance of finding Lucky's original owner, she had to try. With Lucky by her side, she set off down the street, stopping at houses along the way. She spoke to neighbors, explaining that she had found a stray dog and asking if anyone knew who it might belong to. Most of them shook their heads, offering little more than a sympathetic smile. One neighbor even suggested that he might have just wandered into the area, as there were many stray dogs around, but no one knew for sure. By the end of the afternoon, Emily was feeling discouraged. She had spoken to everyone she could think of, but no one had any answers. It was starting to feel like Lucky's past would remain a mystery. But one thing was clear. No matter who he had been before, he was here now, and he had chosen her. When Emily returned home, she walked straight to the backyard where Lucky was resting. She knelt down beside him, petting his fur and letting out a long sigh. It's okay, Lucky, she said softly. We may never know who you were before, but I'm going to make sure you're never alone again. Lucky looked up at her, His eyes filled with trust and gently licked her hand. Emily smiled, feeling that same deep connection. It didn't matter where he came from or who he had once been. What mattered was that he was with her now, and that was enough. The weather had turned. That evening, the skies grew heavy with dark clouds, the kind that warned of a fierce storm coming. Emily had just finished her homework when the wind began to howl outside, rattling the windows. She glanced out the window, watching as trees swayed in the gusts. The storm was coming fast. Her mom, who had been cooking dinner in the kitchen, peered out from the doorway, frowning. "Looks like we're in for a heavy one," her mom said. "I'll make sure all the windows are closed." Emily, too, felt the change in the air. Her gaze drifted toward the back door, and she suddenly felt a strong desire to make sure Lucky was safe. When she opened the door to call him inside, she was surprised to see him standing by the edge of the yard, looking up at the sky. His fur was ruffled, and he seemed uneasy. The thunder rumbled in the distance, and his body stiffened. "Lucky," Emily called out, her voice filled with concern. The dog's ears perked up at her voice, but instead of coming to her, he turned and bolted back toward the trees, his legs moving quickly through the wet grass. Emily's heart raced. No Lucky come back. Without thinking, she ran after him, calling his name as the storm began to break. Rain began to pour down in sheets, drenching Emily within seconds. She struggled to keep up with Lucky, who was moving faster, his body darting through the rain-soaked yard. "Lucky, please," she called again, but the dog didn't stop. The storm was growing worse by the second, and Emily knew she had to get in inside before he hurt himself. Finally, she caught sight of him near the fence, standing still. He was staring intently at something, his eyes fixed on the far side of the yard. Emily approached carefully, trying not to startle him. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. Just as she reached him, a flash of lightning lit up the sky, and a loud crack of thunder shook the ground beneath them. Lucky bolted again, this time leaping toward the far corner of the yard where the bushes grew thick. Emily hesitated, confused. What was he doing? Why was he acting this way? She followed him, not knowing what else to do. As she reached the dense underbrush, she noticed a strange sight. There, partially hidden among the tangled roots of a large bush, was a worn but still intact collar. It wasn't just any collar, it was a faded red one, frayed at the edges with a small tag attached. Emily's heart skipped a beat. Could this be Lucky's old collar? Was it possible that he had found his way back to something familiar, something that reminded him of his past? Lucky stood still beside her, watching her closely. Emily carefully reached out and picked up the collar, turning it over in her hands. The tag was scratched and worn, but she could make out part of the name. Max. Her breath caught in her throat. This was it. She had been right all along. Lucky was not just a stray. He was someone's dog. Max. The realization hit her like a wave. This dog, this friend, had once belonged to someone who had cared for him. But now the collar was abandoned, and Max was here with her. She stood up, the collar still in her hand, and looked down at Lucky. "Your name is Max, isn't it?" she whispered, a mix of sadness and understanding filling her heart. Lucky, Max, had a past. But what had happened to him? Where had he been? Why had he wandered off? As Emily stood there, holding the collar, the storm continued to rage around them. But in that moment, she felt a sense of clarity. She didn't have all the answers, and maybe she never would. But one thing was certain, Max had found her for a reason, and she wasn't about to let him go. "Don't worry, Max," Emily said softly, her voice steady despite the storm. "I don't know what happened to you, but you're safe now. You're home." Max's eyes softened, and he nudged her hand gently with his nose, as if understanding every word. And as the rain continued to pour down, Emily and Max stood together, a silent promise made between them. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world still and wet. The air was thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth, and the sun was just beginning to peek through the clouds. Emily had barely slept that night, her mind racing with questions about Max's past. The collar was a sign, there was no doubt about it. But who had he belonged to? Why had he ended up on his own, wandering the streets and finding his way to her? Max was lying in his usual spot near the window, his head resting on his paws, looking content but somehow distant. Emily could see the weariness in his eyes. He wasn't just a stray anymore. He was a dog with a history, and she needed to understand that history, even if it meant facing things that might be difficult. She picked up the collar from where she'd left it on her desk, the tag glinting in the morning light. The name on the tag had been the only clue, but it wasn't enough. There were still too many unanswered questions. And today, Emily was determined to find the answers. After a quick breakfast, Emily asked her mom if she could take Max for a walk to the park. Her mom, always supportive of Emily's plans, agreed, though with a hint of concern. "Just make sure to keep an eye on him," her mom said, "and be careful." "I will, Mom. Thanks." Emily called back as she grabbed Max's leash and opened the door. Max, who had been dozing on the rug, immediately perked up at the sight of the leash. He was always excited for their walks, but today his usual enthusiasm seemed a little subdued, as though he too sensed that something important was about to happen. They walked down the familiar path to the park, Emily's mind racing with every step. What was she hoping to find? Was there a chance she could track down Max's owner? Could she possibly uncover the story behind his disappearance? As they approached the park, Emily noticed something that made her pause. A man was sitting on a bench, his head down, his shoulders slumped. He looked tired, worn out, like he hadn't had a good night's sleep in weeks. But what caught her attention was the way he was staring at the ground, as though waiting for something, or someone. His face was shadowed, but there was something about him that made her think he was more than just a passerby. Max suddenly pulled on the leash, his body tensing. He tugged with urgency, pulling Emily toward the man. Surprised, Emily followed, unsure what was happening. But as they drew closer, the man's head snapped up and their eyes met. The moment their gazes locked, a flood of recognition washed over Emily. She didn't know how she knew, but something in the way the man looked at Max told her everything she needed to know. Max, or rather Max, had been waiting for him. The man stood up slowly, his face filled with a mixture of disbelief and relief. His hands trembled as he reached for Max, who, without hesitation, bolted toward him, tail wagging furiously. The man bent down, calling softly, "Max, is it really you?" Emily stood frozen, watching as the dog leaped into the man's arms, licking his face as though he had never been apart. The man's eyes shone with tears as he held the dog close, murmuring his name. "I thought I'd lost you forever." Max, or rather Max, seemed just as happy to see the man, nuzzling into his chest. But Emily's heart ached as she watched this reunion unfold. She had known, deep down, that Max belonged to someone else, but seeing it happen in front of her was a different story. The man finally looked up at Emily, his eyes wide with gratitude and wonder. "Thank you," he said hoarsely, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for taking care of him. I've been searching for him for weeks." Emily nodded, her heart heavy with mixed emotions. "I'm glad I could help," she said quietly, unsure of what else to say. The man smiled through his tears, looking at Max as if he still couldn't believe he was holding him again. "I'm his owner," he explained softly. "His name is Max. He's been my best friend for years. He ran off one day, and I've been looking for him ever since." Emily smiled faintly, feeling a wave of relief for Max. He had found his way back to the one person who truly cared for him. But as she stood there, watching the reunion, she knew one thing for certain. She had given Max something he needed, even if only for a brief time, and in return, he had given her a memory she would never forget. The reunion between Max and his owner was overwhelming, filled with emotion. Max, now fully engaged with the man who had once been his companion, seemed to radiate happiness and relief. The man stroked Max's fur gently, his voice cracking as he spoke. "I've missed you so much, buddy. I didn't think I'd ever see you again." Emily stood there, a mix of emotions swirling inside her. Her heart felt warm knowing that Max had found his way home, but there was an undeniable ache in her chest. She had grown so attached to him, had become so deeply connected to him in the time they'd spent together. The thought of saying goodbye, even if it was what was best for him, was almost unbearable. Max, or rather the dog she had come to love so dearly, turned his head toward her, as though he could sense her sadness. He wagged his tail once, but then returned his attention to the man, who was gently kneeling down beside him. The man, noticing the tension in the air, turned back to Emily. He smiled, a mix of gratitude and sadness in his eyes. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for you to get attached, but I'm forever grateful to you for taking care of Max." Emily wiped a stray tear from her cheek, her voice soft but steady. "It's okay. He's yours. He belongs with you." Her words were genuine, but inside, she couldn't help the ache that tugged at her heart. She had opened her heart to this stray dog and, in the process, had found a companion, a friend. But she knew, deep down, that the bond between Max and his true owner was one that couldn't be replaced. It was a bittersweet feeling. She had given him love when he needed it most, and in return, he had given her an experience that she would cherish forever. The man reached out, placing a hand on Emily's shoulder. "You've been more than kind. You saved him, really. I'm not sure how I could ever repay you for that." Emily shook her head, a small smile breaking through her sadness. "You don't have to repay me. I'm just glad I could help." The man gave a soft laugh, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Well, I'd like to do something to thank you properly. How about you and your family join us for dinner sometime? I'd love to show you how much your kindness means to me." Emily nodded, appreciating the gesture. "I'd like that." Max, now fully reunited with his owner, nudged his head into the man's hand once more. It was clear that he was ready to go home. The man stood up, holding Max's leash in his hand. The dog trotted beside him, looking back at Emily with those soulful eyes. For a moment, their gazes locked, and Emily felt the deep, unspoken connection between them. "Take care of him," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. "He's a good boy." The man nodded, giving her one last smile before turning to walk down the park path with Max. "Thank you again, Emily. I'll never forget what you did for us." As she watched them leave, Emily felt a lump form in her throat. Max was finally where he was supposed to be, and she had played a part in that. She would miss him more than she could express, but she was proud of what she had done. She had given him the love and care he needed when he was lost, and in turn, he had shown her the true meaning of unconditional love. As the man and Max disappeared from sight, Emily turned and slowly began her walk home. The rain had stopped, but the air still felt heavy with emotion. She had made a difference in Max's life, and that was something she would always carry with her. Her heart swelled with a quiet peace as she realized that sometimes letting go was just as important as holding on. Max was home, and in that moment, Emily understood that sometimes love means doing what's best for the ones we care about, even if it means saying goodbye. The days that followed Max's departure were quiet, almost too quiet. Emily couldn't help but feel the absence of the dog who had brought so much warmth into her life. The spot by the window, once filled with Max's presence, now felt empty. His absence left a quiet space in her heart, but she also carried with her a sense of peace, knowing that he was back with his rightful owner, safe and loved. But life had a way of moving forward, and Emily soon found herself back into the rhythm of her school days, spending time with friends, and engaging in the little things that had once filled her routine. Yet there was always a small part of her that remained tethered to that special time she had shared with Max. It was a chapter that would forever be part of her story. One afternoon, about a week after Max had been reunited with his owner, Emily was sitting on her porch reading a book. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the backyard. She was deep in the pages of her novel when a familiar sound broke through her focus, the sound of a dog's bark. Emily's heart skipped. She stood up quickly, her eyes scanning the yard. The bark came again, louder this time, and then a figure appeared at the edge of the yard. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw Max. No, he was Max running toward her with his tail wagging. "Max," Emily called out, a burst of joy flooding her chest. The dog leaped forward, bounding with excitement, and without hesitation, he jumped up, licking her face as though they hadn't been apart at all. Max's owner appeared a few seconds later, walking quickly behind him. He was smiling, but there was a hint of hesitation in his step. "I'm sorry to bother you," he called out from the gate. He wanted to come back. He's been a little restless since the other day." Emily could hardly believe what she was hearing. She gently patted Max's head as he continued to nuzzle her affectionately. "It's okay. He's just happy to see me," she replied, her voice filled with emotion. The man approached, looking apologetic. "I don't want to impose. I promise we're not trying to take him from you, but he's been looking for you ever since we left. I think he just wanted to come by and say thank you." Emily smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "He doesn't need to thank me," she said, her voice thick with affection. "He's the one who helped me. He's a good dog." The man chuckled softly. "I can see that. He's got a big heart, just like you." The moment felt surreal. Max, who had once been a stray, was now a part of her life again, even if it was just for a brief visit. She knelt down to his level, looking into his eyes, and for a moment, it felt like no time had passed. It was as if they were still on those afternoon walks, the world still new and full of possibilities. "I'll never forget him," Emily said softly to the man, her voice carrying the weight of everything she had experienced in their short time together. "And I'm glad he has you now." Max's owner smiled, nodding in agreement. "He's lucky to have you in his life. You're the reason he's back with me, and I won't forget that." With a final pat on Max's head, the man turned and began walking back to his house, calling Max to follow him. But the dog hesitated for a moment, looking back at Emily one last time, before turning and trotting after his owner. As they disappeared from view, Emily stood there for a moment, her heart full of gratitude. She had given Max